Okay, and now I am pleased to be moderating our first panel discussion for the day. Each of these three speakers will address issues from their perspectives on how we can accommodate the future demands for ocean space to sustain port access, maritime navigation, and accommodate development of offshore wind and the increase other ocean uses. First, we'll hear from John Stone, Marine Transportation Specialist with the U.S. Coast Guard, for an overview of how the U.S. Coast Guard is managing the demand for ocean space. Then we'll hear from Sean Kline, Director of Maritime Affairs with the Chamber of Shipping of America, about ship factors for ocean space. And finally, we'll hear from Nick Napoli, Marco Senior Advisor and NROC Executive Director, about using the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal to understand current and future maritime patterns. Following their presentations, we'll have a question and answer and group discussion. So please put those questions and comments you have about sustainable ocean economy issues in the Mid-Atlantic into the chat box. I'll now introduce our first panelist, John Stone. John Stone is a marine transportation specialist with the U.S. Coast Guard, whose major projects have included shipping safety fairways along the Atlantic coast, offshore renewable energy installations, and oversight of multiple port access route studies. He works on a variety of safety navigation issues, including electronic charts and navigational equipment carriage requirements, navigational safety in and around offshore renewable energy installations, autonomous shipping, and marking and lighting for offshore wind turbines. John, I can turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to participate in this panel. And I always enjoy taking part in these because it really shows the open communication and the commitment to our partnerships with both other federal agencies as well as the industry and our maritime stakeholders. So I think when we're looking at accommodating future demands for ocean space, it automatically leads me to what the Coast Guard, in the Coast Guard, we call, or what we have been calling recently, the triple challenge, where our challenge is to increase the capacity of the marine transportation system. We'd like to decrease shipping's marine environmental footprint. And while we're doing this, while we're doing both of these, we're doing it with an ever increasing complexity within the MTS environment. So today I'm going to mostly talk about the capacity challenge, and I'll touch a little bit about that increasing complexity. So next slide, please. Now, before I get started, as you know, the Coast Guard is a regulatory agency in the maritime domain, and we are also a military organization. So it should be to no surprise that we don't do anything without a plan. So this is just a quick snapshot of our implementation plan for our Maritime Commerce Strategic Outlook. And this document outlines our initiatives with our 3 lines of effort, which you can read right there on the screen. And these initiatives and action items address and they set the tone for what we are pursuing while addressing this triple challenge. Next slide, please. Now, as we dive into our capacity challenge, this snapshot is a lay of the land, or the water, if you will, and it shows the top 25 U.S. ports by tonnage throughout the country. Southern Louisiana, Houston, and New York, New Jersey lead the way. And although I don't have the graphic to show, if you were to look at this by value, New York, New Jersey, and Los Angeles, Long Beach would actually be the top 2, and that would be based on high value containerized cargo. And I provide this snapshot because as we discuss the demands for ocean space and sustainment of port access, these are the primary ports throughout the country. But what this graphic does not show are the number of small ports that still provide significant income at the regional and local level, much like a fishing community, if you will. So we're very cognizant to consider port access for all U.S. ports, not just these major ones that I've seen here. Shown here, excuse me. Next slide, please. So I really like this graphic because it helps tell the story that the demand for growing capacity in the MTS not only comes from the growth of what would be considered novel uses of the waterways, like offshore renewable energy or commercial space, but also from traditional uses. So prior to 1970, the largest container ships had about a 1,700 TEU capacity, which equated to about, putting less than 10 shipping containers across the breadth of the ship. and the ship's average depth was less than 30 feet. As we've moved to more modern ships, we're seeing greater than 14,000 TEU ships. I think the largest one last year, I think we had one that was just under 20,000 TEUs. And that's more than double the width and more than double the draft of the ships prior to 1970. And this is important from a federal perspective, especially from our waterways trident of federal agencies, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, and NOAA, from our perspective, because our MTS, our waterways, were primarily designed prior to 1970. So we've got growing ships, and we have had, up until somewhat recently, kind of stagnant size of our ports. I'm getting to that here in a second. So we have a need to address our waterways to support the growth of this shipping size, as well as demand for port access from novel uses. Next slide, please. Now, this information is on those port expansions. Is information provided by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it shows all the federal projects underway to support channel widening, deepening, expansion, etc. Now, the Coast Guard has many roles in this expansion. There's not just the adjustment of the aids to navigation, or are there sufficient anchorage grounds to support the increased use of the port, but also does the captain of the port need to reconsider any port orders, any port security issues, environmental response? There's a myriad more things that ultimately lead to our goal of a safe, secure, efficient maritime transportation system as these ports expand. Next slide, please. As we shift to novel uses of the waterway, I appreciate the graphics here provided by Boehm. As we shift to the novel uses of waterway, our goal of maintaining the safe, secure, efficient, environmentally sound, a resilient marine transportation system, it doesn't change. With the administration's goal of 30 gigawatts of electrical power from offshore wind by 2030, given wind farm sizes, locations, configurations, coupled with an influx of necessary workboats to construct and support the offshore industry, offshore wind has the potential to impact navigation safety for all users. Now, the Coast Guard still has a primary responsibility to designate necessary fairways, traffic separation schemes, to provide that safe access for vessel traffic to and from U.S. ports. But we can't do this in a vacuum. We have to consider all other uses of the waterways, as well as consult with other federal agencies, states, and reconcile any conflicts, to the extent practicable. There are currently 24 leases on the Outer Continental Shelf, both coasts there, with 2 or more coming later this month. And our role in marine planning is important. And if I got those numbers wrong, I know Boehm will correct me on them. But our role from a marine planning perspective is really important. And our work with Boehm and the developers and the shipping industry is critical for a safe marine transportation system. Sometimes these conflicts between the ideal locations to develop an offshore wind and a traditional shipping lane or fishing ground, they all happen to be in the same spot, and the Coast Guard looks as a role to kind of balance these potential impacts of proposed projects with safe navigation and traditional uses of the waterway, as well as our own ability to conduct our required missions. So in addition to our authorities to provide the safe access, we do work with Boehm as a cooperating agency under NEPA as throughout the entire leasing development process, providing recommendations on navigation safety concerns, potential impacts on missions, both in and adjacent to proposed installations. Next slide, please. The space sector. So the space sector is relying on the maritime domain to launch and recover spacecraft. And this is due to the economy that is offered by the maritime domain. It's more economically feasible to reach the final frontier offshore. But these space operations do introduce some additional risk, an additional risk profile to our waterways. From a Coast Guard perspective, this risk profile impacts captain of the port, marine inspections, federal unseen coordinator from an environmental response, search and rescue, and maritime security. So all these authorities that the Coast Guard has are all impacted by the introduction of space in the maritime domain. Next slide, please. And finally, autonomy. This speaks to our ever-increasing complexity in our triple challenge. So the commercial space, like we just talked about, you can see the Marmac there in the bottom right-hand corner. And what they do, that has a dynamic positioning incorporated into the barge, and it is linked into the rocket as it's coming down and it's landing. This is virtually autonomous, and there's no people on board because, quite frankly, it's safer to do this without a person on board. So that's an example of how autonomous technology is helping make a safer and more efficient MTS. We've also got autonomous oceanographic research drones collecting survey data all along the coast on the Great Lakes. And I'm sure many of you may have heard of the Mayflower autonomous ship currently underway on a transatlantic voyage from the United Kingdom to New England with Watson at the con. Crossing the pond. So autonomy is a growing technology. And again, that goal is to make operations safer and more efficient. From a Coast Guard perspective, there are issues with our vessel manning laws, our regulatory requirements, call regs, international agreements. These are just some of the challenges that we're facing. And so to begin to address these issues, we've stood up the Automated and Autonomous Vessel Policy Council, or the AutoPOCO. I said we like our plans. We also like our acronyms. So we stood up the AutoPOCO at Coast Guard headquarters to coordinate policy development, to do a deep dive into our regulations, and to address the increasing use autonomy has within the MTS. So, and with that, I think I will stop talking. I think I've been going for about 10 minutes. I'll give someone else a chance on the mic, and then I'll stand by for any questions throughout the panel.
Thanks, John. That was really cool. A lot of the autonomous stuff in space. You're really at the head of a lot of technology. I would like to introduce and by the way, don't hesitate to put those questions in the chat so we have something to talk about. Let's see. I will now turn to our next panelist, Sean Kline. Sean Kline is the Director of Maritime Affairs at the Chamber of Shipping of America and has extensive experience in maritime operations and policy, and is an industry expert on Maritime Safety and Security Committee, BIMCO's Maritime Safety and Security Committee and Maritime Security Advisory Committee at the U.S. State Department. Sean co-founded the Maritime Exchange for Digital Security and sits on the International Industry Roundtable Cybersecurity Working Group that developed and revises the guidelines on cybersecurity on board ships. Sean, if you're ready, I can turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wright. I just want to say thank you to Mako and Wright and Leanne and for having me at BOEM, for having me today. I got to say, before I start, it's an honor to be on here. There's not more of a patriot that you'll find, or someone I respect more than Deerin Babb-Brott. So it's an honor to be on here with him as well. We can flip through these first couple slides kind of quick. So my name's Sean Kline. I'm with the Chamber of Shipping of America here in DC. We represent, we can go to the next slide. We represent owners, let me say this, commercial cargo ship owners, operators, and charterers in the US, and also at the International Maritime Organization in London. Next slide. And what you see here is a real diverse group. And what makes the Chamber of Shipping different is we have different operators carrying different cargoes, traveling different routes all around the world. So you'll see chemical carrier operators in here, and oil carriers and container operators and all the like, and those companies that support them as well. So that really gives a global view and a very diverse view when you look at ship operations. Next slide. Great, thanks. And what should be glaringly obvious to you on this slide is that I am a seafarer at heart. I spent several years at sea, And that's why there's too many words and pictures, and you see a very crowded slide here. So I am not your marketing person, but love to talk about this and shipping and these issues with you on this Friday morning. You know, I think it's important when we discuss this panel, and the headlines out there are involving supply chain delays and that ships are polluting, or, you know, we're getting to carbon free. I think it's important to realize all the factors that are involved in that. 90% of the world's cargo is transported by ships. And what does that mean to you? I'll tell you exactly what that means to you. It means that Sunday is Mother's Day and tomorrow is Saturday. So you're all going to be running to Target to get mom your cards and your wife's cards. And we need to make sure that those things are on the shelf for you. And those predominantly came by ship. And, you know, looking at the mid-Atlantic in general, I've brought these factors down to kind of, there's certainly, this is far from all inclusive, but these are the issues that I think really affect now the mid-Atlantic. And to start with, there's been a lot of news about carbon-free shipping by 2050. And as an industry, it's something that we've been working on for a long time. We want to get there, not just carbon, but all emissions. But the issue that we're having with putting a date in the, you know, a line in the sand or a date out there is we don't really have a clear path to get there right now. And we're all working on that, and technology is there. But one example of that would be alternative fuels. And when we say alternative fuels, what is alternative fuels? Is that a biofuel? And if it's a biofuel, is that biofuel made of algae, or is it made of banana peels? Or how are we, the engine manufacturers will tell you we can make an engine to run on just about anything. We just need to know what fuels it. And we're in a real chicken and egg scenario here with alternative fuels, on what alternative fuels are available and where they are available. And you know, when in shipping, there's certain ships that are on routes. You have container ships that are you can almost predict the exact time that they'll be in port. But a majority of the shipping is actually is not on routes, and some of these ships don't know where they're going. They start heading in a direction, and then they're told where to go. And when those ships pull into port, that fuel consistency needs to be the same. So it has to be reliable for the engines to be able to run on that. And so the fuels piece of it is a big issue. And then by saying 2050, it's something we're trying to achieve, but the lifespan of a ship is 20 years. And when you start to back those things out, it takes, you know, depending on shipyard availability, where the ship's built, it could take 2 to 5 years to have a ship built. It could take 1 to 2 years to design that ship and for all the approvals that are necessary. And so if we say we're going to have carbon-free ships by 2050, those decisions on the design, those things have to be made today. We have to get those things done immediately so that the ship can be in compliance for the entire life of the ship. Another issue that I think is coming up here, and I'm just going to pick a few off of here. Underwater noise. Commercial vessel underwater noise is, in my opinion, will be one of the next conventions coming out of the International Maritime Organization. It's something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that you know, we anticipate being developed into the ship design on the forefront, so ships can be designed more efficiently and quieter. I wasn't going to raise this one. So it's certainly a sensitive and a sad issue, but you know, even when we look at some of these things, military conflicts and operations around the world have an effect right here in the mid-Atlantic, and 14% of the seafarers are Ukrainian or Russian, and that creates a lot of difficulties when there's sanctions involved, when there's crew changes, when seafarers are trying to get home and get replaced on the ship so that they can have some time off. Obviously, navigating in the area is extremely difficult. We still have 500 seafarers down from 2,000 that were stranded in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So, you know, this has an effect when these ships come into the U.S. The seafarers can be restricted to the ships. We can't, you know, typically we change out crew, and we can't do that as well. So it's just a recent example of some things that also can affect how we use our oceans and how commercial shipping is affected. We looked at, we have to bring up wind energy areas, right? Because we don't want to make the whole presentation about it, but however, it is an issue in this region, as John said, and it's something that as a shipping industry we've supported for a long time. And what we really want to bring up on this is just to continue the engagement. I can say that when I worked for an operator over a decade ago, at one time, wind energy areas were planned in the shipping lanes coming into the Port of Virginia. And that we've come a long way since then. Obviously, ships can't get into the Port of Virginia if we have wind turbines there. So the communication has been fantastic. The stakeholder engagement has improved. And because of that, we just continue the messaging, saying we support offshore wind energy. We just have to think of the cumulative effect. And on the right side of my crowded slide here, if you look at all those wind energy areas and think of a ship navigating the East Coast and say coming from, you know, Virginia to New York, New Jersey, just that we're not zigzagging and creating safety hazards for the people and the environment, as well as we navigate that the shipping lanes have enough space to get in and out and respond to any kind of emergencies, weather, engine casualties, etc. Autonomous ships, I just have two comments on that because I think John did a great job of covering that. But it's important to know that when we say autonomous ships, and when we talk about autonomous ships at the International Maritime Organization, there's levels of autonomy. And I'm speaking directly to commercial cargo ships. But if some people like to jump to a very large container ship that's crossing the ocean with no one on board, we're not there yet, and we're far from there. We're still developing regulation. We still need to understand if there's an oil spill in the middle of the ocean and nobody's on the ship, how do we address that? So, levels of autonomy means that maybe there's a reduction in crew. Maybe there's a different type of seafarer. Maybe that instead of, learning to solely navigate, we have more IT-minded young professionals that are manning these ships are on board. But in my view, autonomous shipping where no one is on board on commercial cargo ships is off in the future. I'm hoping that I'll be retired by then, but I like to see the progression as it comes along. And I think what we'll see in the future is a reduced crew on board and a change in the way that that the ships are operated. And then maybe in the future we'll get to something where we have fewer crew. But it's very difficult to operate a ship without at least a few people on board. Maritime, that leads me into maritime cybersecurity, and I have to touch on this because a ship right now is so digitally connected, and it's only getting more connected to the point where if you have a reefer container, which means a refrigerated container on board a ship, When I was sailing, we used to get on a ladder and tie it off and climb up the ladder and read the temps on those refrigerator containers to make sure that they were still operating. Now, somebody across the country can look at their computer screen and see exactly what the temperature is on that box. So you have containers that are connected. You have engine, not just the engine in the ship that's connected, but parts of the engine that are connected to manufacturers. You have cargo loading plans. It just goes on in addition to all the navigation equipment. So the ships are very connected. Those are all access points that can be vulnerabilities and manipulated. And whether we're talking about just the operation of a ship today or autonomous ships in the future, maritime cybersecurity is a big factor, especially for ships once they get close to ports in the mid-Atlantic or anywhere where they can cause damage or cause an impact. And finally, I would just like to say, excuse me, dry throat. Finally, I'd just like to say, I really think when we take factors in ocean planning into account, that we need to remain flexible, and that means commercial cargo shipping. That means the Coast Guard. That means fishing. That means all these entities that are using the ocean. We need to be flexible. We need to be able to continue conversation, and we need to have effective communication and effective stakeholder engagement. And what I mean by that is it's easy to put something out and say, maybe in the Federal Register, or maybe send an email out, or however an agency or an organization is doing that, and say, send your comments in. But that's not always the most effective way to really get the information that we want, or that the entity seeks, I should say. So what I have been impressed with is the stakeholder engagement that is reaching out on an individual level. The workshops that Mako used to do, where we would, for lack of a better formality, we would sit around the table and understand, what's important to different stakeholders, and kind of consolidate that, and what maybe perception wasn't reality for that stakeholder. Hey, we can work around that, or that's not so important to us. So I think the communication is extremely important. And on that, as a nice segue, right, to Nick is the Ocean Data Portal, and that tool has been fantastic. I know we use it a lot. I know other entities use it a lot. But what's been done there, the layers that have been put in, the updates that have been done to it, and the way it's been maintained on and on is a fantastic tool. We're extremely supportive of that. So thank you all. I don't see enough questions in the chat, so please ask questions. I'm happy to continue the conversation, whether it's today or in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. That was great. Let's see. I will now introduce our final panelist, Nick Napoli. Nick Napoli is Senior Advisor to the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean and Executive Director of the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. Among his responsibilities are managing the outreach, data development, and ocean planning and management requirements for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast Ocean data portals. Nick, it's your turn, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Wright. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be on this panel. I don't see my slides up. Maybe it's just on my side. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Next slide, please. Thanks, Avalon. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. It's always fun to be on a maritime panel with maritime experts, especially John and Sean, who have set me up well and are huge supporters, and as you heard, and huge contributors to our work. And thanks to both of them, because a lot of what you see on the portals are a reflection of the input we get and the data that people provide. I'm not an expert in the maritime industry like the two previous speakers, but what we're good at is making sure that the experts are involved in designing the data and the maps that reflect their industry or their use. And so that's what the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal and the Northeast Ocean Data Portals are trying to do. We're trying to provide map products that show the footprint and the changes over time for ocean activities and ecological resources. And those map products are based on management needs, regulatory needs, and they're based on understanding any particular topic with the people who know those topics well. And in this case, John and Sean are, as I said, are huge contributors to our maritime theme. There are also a number of instructional and educational resources on the portal. Ocean Stories dig in a little bit into some of the different activities that you're seeing on the water and how the maps may play into that. And Carl Villacova, who manages the portal, does a great job of putting those together. We also have a bunch of webinars that are archived. We do trainings. If people want a training, you just reach out to either Carl or me, and we'll be happy to set that up. And also, we've been expanding our tools that allow users to really collaborate via a private group. If you want to have some data discussions around data that you don't want to have public, we can enable that. Next slide, please. Okay, maritime data on the portal, and you know, the name of this session is about accommodating future demands, and we have a lot of good data about what's currently going on or has gone on, and I'll talk a little bit later about maybe, and we're certainly looking for input of maybe some of the things we'd like to see that help us think about the future a little bit better. But a lot of our maritime data on the portal, I need to thank the Marine Cadastre folks because a lot of it comes from that collaboration, that NOAA-BOEM collaboration on the Marine Cadastre results in a lot of the maritime data that you see on both the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic portals and around the country. And a lot of these data sets you're looking at here. And that's great because it allows us to focus on the stakeholder outreach. It allows us to focus on the ways in which the industry thinks that this data should be represented and the communication of it, and the other kinds of data that you'd want to see along with it. Generally, when you go to the portal, you'll see data that it's around safety and navigation. A lot of what you're seeing on this slide, pilot boarding areas, ferry routes, terminals, aids to navigation, anchorages, proposed anchorages, maintained channels, and of course the routing measures. So that'll give you a good picture, like the charts do, but pull these data out into individual layers, allow you to a little bit more flexibility to see the existing navigation and safety measures that are out there. Next slide, please. Again, speaking about our work with the Marine Cadastre here, these AIS data come from them. They get the data from the Coast Guard and process it for us so that we can create these maps that show the actual activity. Where I was shown before was the existing safety and navigation measures. This shows the actual vessel activity via AIS. This map's actually showing all of the activity in 2020 for all vessels. I'm not as good a PowerPoint creator as Carl, so I did not make the animation that he would have probably had, but you can go to the portal and see the activity over time, month to month, year to year, and there are vessel breakdowns. So you can see a lot of different types of activity here. You can certainly see the fairways. You see the near coastal routes of the tug tow. You see a lot of fishing activity. You can go to the portal and isolate those different vessel types. And I would also encourage you, I'm not sure if somebody from the Marine Cadastre project's on, if they have, I know that they have been developing a new tool called Access AIS, which is fantastic. I played with it, I think in a draft form. I don't know if it's public yet, but that allows you to slice and dice the AIS even further for an area of interest. And I encourage you to check that out when and if that's available. Next slide, please. Other maritime data on the portal, sometimes we tend to focus on a lot of the shipping, ports, navigation, and safety type of data on these panels. But of course, I can't ignore the other important activities that are really relevant to a lot of the ports. A lot of them around recreational types of activities like whale and dolphin watching or commercial fishing activity. And you're seeing on this slide just a couple of examples. On the left, we just concluded a bunch of outreach in the Mid-Atlantic to the whale and dolphin watch operators. In this case, the larger entities that maybe have larger vessels that do show up in AIS. And we took a lot of their data via AIS. We were able to isolate their vessels, go back to them and say, it looks like these are the areas you are using for whale watch activities. And so we went back and forth a few times and refined these areas. We're not putting out the AIS data, it's individual vessel tracks, but we are putting out these general areas that show what's important to those industries. And I think this map will be available shortly. It is available from about New York north. It's going to be available from New York City south probably in the next week. As I mentioned, commercial fisheries, obviously an important port and offshore use, a lot of commercial fisheries data, and in that case, a lot of outreach to the industry to identify needs and ensure that we're communicating some of these products appropriately. And on the right, you're seeing an example of scalloped vessel activity from the vessel monitoring system. Next slide, please. So another thing that we're doing is trying to provide as much information about current or recent management actions so that you can use all of the data we're putting out there to provide comment or better understand the potential impacts of a potential or existing management action. Some of the examples I have here, we have right whale seasonal management areas on the portal that may be of interest to the maritime industry. We've worked closely with John, and I thank John and folks over at NavSend for collaborating with us on getting the information out on the port access route studies that are going on along the Atlantic coast. You can see both the study areas and some of the draft recommendations, and we often provide links to the Federal Register notice. There's some information in there about comment periods, and you can use our maps to provide information to the Coast Guard on some of their activities. Next slide, please. Of course, offshore winds come up and will come up even after this panel. And we are certainly working closely with BOEM to make sure that our data are reflecting the current status of the offshore wind planning and leasing on the Atlantic coast. On the left, you're seeing all the active leases. On the right, you're seeing the planning areas, including the recent call area for the Central Atlantic that actually has an open comment period right now. You can go to the portal, you can pull out just that Central Atlantic planning area and use our maps to provide comment. Next slide, please. So speaking about future work, we do have an opportunity here. As you heard from Deerin, there's some funding coming to the regions. And we have existing funding sources for the portal, and we do benefit a lot from the work that the Marine Cadastre does to give us information on maritime conditions. But there have been a lot of suggestions about additional things we could do, and maybe we have the opportunity here to prioritize some of these, hear what else we should be doing, and start to do some additional work. Some of this has been mentioned already by John and Sean. We have heard, and I think there was some analyses done actually a couple of years ago on could we actually use the AIS data to isolate port-to-port routes, because we might be isolating individual vessels or vessel types in some of the data we already have, but some ports may get lost, and they're important routes and might get lost in the larger AIS data set. And so there have been suggestions that isolating specific port-to-port routes might actually enable us to show the importance of an area to a particular port. As John had already shown, space launch and recovery areas, not something we thought about. And we heard this in the Central Atlantic task force meeting and from John, and that's something else that we could be looking into. we do not provide a lot of specific mapping around conflicts. What we've been focusing on is really trying to get the data out there that are informed and reviewed by the experts and allow you to do that mapping. But maybe we could be looking at some of these specific types of conflicts if there's a strong interest in that. And we have heard about the potential conflict between anchoring and cables, given the likely increase in cables associated with offshore wind. Both John and Sean talked about potential future conditions. Certainly, there's been and are a lot of planned changes in port infrastructure to support the offshore wind industry and other changes in the ports that may actually result in changes in maritime patterns, deepening channels, increased uses of autonomous vessels. All of this stuff I stole from John, but it's also been suggested by many other folks that ports are changing and therefore patterns might be changing. And so we might need to think about how we can represent that on a map. Next slide, please. Outreach. This is how we get, as I said, this is how we get all of our information. I should add NavSend in here because obviously we talked to John a bunch, but we learn a lot about the maritime conditions through the Coast Guard, Districts 1 and 5. Obviously, they're the experts, and that's where we get a lot of our information. We spend time with some of the larger associations like the North Atlantic Ports Association, Sean and Chamber of Shipping. We work with some of the pilots associations along the coast to get information, review our maps, and understand what other data we might need to put on the portal. Port and harbor committees. I attend as many of these as I can, especially the port operator groups and some of the safety and security committees. They're often talking about what's coming up and, current conditions in the next month. And then, it's always a little bit awkward for the ocean planning guy to come on and talk about long-term, but I learn a lot from those meetings and people provide a lot of input on our data. And as I mentioned, the whale and dolphin watch operators and the fishing industry through a number of mechanisms, we're always looking for input. I believe that's all I have. Next slide, please. Please contact us. We are always looking for ideas. If somebody has a particular topic that they're interested in, could provide feedback, we'd love to hear it. And as I said, we're always planning our next year or 2 years worth of data development, and everyone's input is really influencing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Now I want to move to the question and answer and discussion part of the panel. I'll ask a question or two to a few of the panelists before we open this up for everyone. I see that the chat box has been percolating, which is great. I think we're going to talk to John first, question for John first, because he's got a conflict at 10, I believe. We're going to lose him. So let's.
You're not going to lose me.
We're not
going to lose me.
We're not going to lose me
first.
Okay, that's right. We'll get you before you lose him. Are there any upcoming Coast Guard navigation and vessel inspection circulars being prepared for offshore wind that you can give us a preview of or let us know about?
I can. So I'm sure the offshore wind development and BOEM are well aware of our current NAVIC 0119, which discusses roles and responsibilities of the Coast Guard with offshore renewable energy installations, not just offshore wind, it's everything. That's the second version. There was another one, I think goes back to 2007. But we're currently rewriting that. We look at that every couple of years periodically as the industry develops and gets more robust and our roles become more defined and we get more comfortable in our roles and authorities, as well as our relationships with our federal partners and the industry. There's times to adjust how we do things and our recommendations within that navigation vessel inspection circular. But another one that we're actually in draft. Oh, and the update for that should come out. We're hoping to get that published this fall, by this fall. And then the other one that we're working on too, I'll be full disclosure. We borrow a lot of recommendations that we're learning from our cousins across the pond, if you will. And so the United Kingdom has a marine guidance notice that's to mariners. It's addressing to mariners on operations in and around wind farms or offshore renewable energy installations. And so we are in the process of, we borrowed from that. This past year, we pitched it to our National Navigation Safety Advisory Committee to get their input. And we're currently drafting, a NAVIC specified for mariners to just give them some lessons learned and advice and recommendations when navigating in and adjacent to offshore renewable energy installations. And that is also, our goal is to publish that this fall.
Excellent. Thank you. Deerin, I have a question for you. As a veteran of 3 administrations, do you have any advice to share on how to future-proof our priorities in regional ocean planning? And that's about it. How to make sure what we're doing is something that will be seen as a priority, whoever comes along.
Sure. Thanks, Wright. It's a great question. And I guess right off the bat, I'd think about 2 answers. One is geographic and structural, which is the regions themselves as contemporary expressions of cross-sectoral perspective, what matters, what's important, what you want to do, consensus-based approach is inherently strong over time. That's not something that's subject to any kind of cycle, right? So if you think about Marco and then explode that across the nation, it's one of the things that's so important and valuable to me about focusing coastal and ocean management issues around regions and regional solutions, right? The second piece is to pay attention to and to focus on things that are evergreen, durable, and of value and utility to everyone, right? This is something that we have tried to do in a number of different ways. It's also one of the reasons, again, where I think the region is so valuable, and the data portals certainly are a great example of this. Data and information is valuable to everybody. Ocean science and technology is valuable to everybody. Maximizing the economic, social, cultural value of the ocean is valuable to everyone. There are different philosophies and perspectives on how to achieve that, which start to get into different ways of thinking about it, which lend themselves more to evaluation and different kinds of approaches over different kinds of cycles. But there are components that are critical to everyone that we care about. With respect to his memory, the example I used to use was, Don Young, the congressman from Alaska, was a huge supporter of IUs and of coastal observations because they were critical to the interests of his constituents in Alaska, right? So, if you talk to him about that work, he was front and center, as a vociferous supporter. He was a co-sponsor, right? If you went into Don Young's office and talked to him about President Obama's National Ocean Council, he'd pick you up by the scruff of the neck and throw you out the door, right? The point is, there are ways of thinking about this that wrap it all up in, a given cycle's perspective on life. But the stuff that matters, the core stuff, continues across the board, and that's how we focus on the things that matter, right, over time. It is important, necessary, and totally appropriate that different administrations bring different perspectives and philosophies in terms of how to solve problems, how to organize resources, and how to move forward. That's the way it should be. That's what the American people do when we have elections, right? But informing all of that is our job, and our job to create solutions that last over time by making sure that those decisions are based on the best information possible and the best collection and application of the experience, expertise, and perspectives that are represented in this kind of gathering. So, thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Deerin. That was a really insightful answer. Question for Sean. Can you elaborate on how some of these navigation challenges cumulatively and how to think about facing some of the factors facing commercial cargoes and how they work together and to pose kind of challenge, how they interact with each other to pose challenges in navigation in the Mid-Atlantic?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of ties into a question that I saw in the chat as well. Can ships move around, once the areas are established? And that's a great question. Absolutely. And when I say flexibility, I mean flexibility from ships as well as every other user and organization involved. Ships can move around. It's just the thought process that we should put into it as far as let's plan it. Let's make sure that we understand and everyone else understands before we put steel in the water and it's too late. Because one thing I can tell you is once these wind energy areas are in, and then it's going to be too late. If a ship hits them, it's the ship's fault. So it's just having the conversation beforehand. I like to equate it to, if you're driving down the highway, or not a highway, but a road. I know here in our town, roads have expanded. There's now light poles in the middle of sidewalks and things like that because it was too much to move them. If a car hits that light pole, it's the car's fault, not the fact that the light pole might be a foot from the roadway. So it's not that, again, we have supported offshore energy for a long time. We still support it. It's just making sure that we're thinking of all that we can, and we're taking into consideration safety of seafarers that are on those ships, and also the environment. The last thing that anybody wants to happen is a casualty this close to shore. So, and as far as the other navigational issues, it's really a tough situation where the shipping industry is extremely regulated. It's changing consistently due to cargoes, trade patterns, the size of ships, and fuels, and where even competition between ports and where our ships are going, and things like that. So with all those things involved, we just have to be smart. We need to keep talking to each other. We need to keep engaging. And as things develop, stakeholder engagement is key. And like I said, I think we've come a long way, and we certainly need to keep our foot on the gas as far as stakeholder engagement goes.
John, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in a little on what Sean was saying, and there was a great discussion in the chat about the planning for the fairways, it's actually on two sides of it, because I believe designated fairways also assists in the development and the other uses as well. So I will say when we are planning, because it's still in the development stage, the fairways and traffic separation schemes along the Atlantic coast. Right now the proposals are based on where 95% of the maritime traffic transits now. And so again, echoing what Sean said about the shipping, but also what that does is that lets the developers know and lets BOEM know, as we have our continued discussions with our federal partners, that hey, these are places where ships typically transit. These are places where typically ships do not. There was a discussion there on the Gulf of Mexico. So you got to realize that Gulf of Mexico goes back to, those were established back in the 40s through the 60s. Those were when the Army Corps actually had, and that's not a knock against the Army Corps, but the Army Corps had the authority to designate them back then. And then the requirement for the consultation, the study, which we call a port access route study, for the economic impacts, environmental impacts, all of that didn't come about until 1978 when the authority was transferred over to the Coast Guard with the Ports and Waterways Safety Act. And so those fairways were very reactionary to the oil boom in the Gulf of Mexico way back then. And so what we're trying to avoid is that reactionary piece. We want to make sure that all waterway users have a stake in the discussion so we can make the best informed decision for all users of the waterways in the United States. So I really appreciate the comments by Sean, and I agree. I think it's all the industries keeping that communication open and working together for us to help.
Thanks, John. We're getting a lot of really interesting questions here. One for Nick, and I'm is it was about real-time updates. Is that something that what are the challenges there, and what would it take for something like that to?
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's from Jerry Barnes, right? Thanks, Jerry, for the question. We get this question a lot more now. And, I can say that we're certainly interested in talking more about it. We have some data in there that, like I don't think I showed it, and it's on the Northeast portal, and will also be on the Mid-Atlantic portal shortly. We have the dynamic management areas that pop up for right whales. That's sort of real time. We've actually had a lot of comments from the offshore wind industry around this topic, that maybe there's a need for more real-time information, given all of the traffic that may be going on around offshore wind development, even if it's just surveying. But now, as we're getting towards or near to construction, certainly more traffic will be occurring. And so we're certainly interested in considering it. The IUCs do a very good job of providing real-time oceanographic data. And I think maybe there could be a collaboration there with them to work with the industry, both the shipping industry and the offshore wind industry, to provide some additional data in there that might give us an understanding of what's going on currently. So I'd love to reach out to Jerry and talk more about it, and if anyone else is interested as well.
That's thank you. Yeah, the technological challenges seemed kind of overwhelming to me when I thought about it. So it's good that it's not just it's a pipe dream kind of response.
Yeah, for AIS, this data is out there in a real-time form. So I think in that case, it might just be a matter of working with the Coast Guard or maybe some of the private data managers there to figure out how to get a feed in there. But I also would want to better understand what the needs are from the developers, the shipping industry, because there may be ways that we can modify that and make it more useful.
Question for Deerin. Yesterday we had panels on blue carbon and a lot of discussion on that subject. What do you see as the most promising techniques for capitalizing on blue carbon and the removal of carbon dioxide from the ocean?
With apologies to the questioner, I'm going to punt on that, right? Process right now is process is where we are, right? So National Academy is working on it. We're working on it. Agencies are working on that. I'm neither qualified nor approved to sort of get out in public and weigh in on that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to punt. Sorry.
Okay. That's fair. Question for John. The offshore wind industry would appreciate an opportunity to review and comment on NVICs targeted to mariners who operate in the vicinity of wind farms. And then commented, we all share the goal of safety and coexistence. Are these developed with, or can they be?
So you froze a little on my screen. Am I frozen? I just want to make sure I'm being heard right now.
You sound okay to me. You're
okay.
Good.
All right. So just a glitch in my matrix. I will say there was a member when I said that new NAVIC on for mariners, when we gave that to our National Navigation Safety Advisory Committee, there was an ad hoc member from the offshore wind industry that did contribute to that input from them. Jerry, I see it was you that made the comment. We're always welcome to open the dialogue with all the marine affairs directors, with the developers, to make sure that we're doing this the right way. So we don't anticipate putting it in the Federal Register for comment before we bring the NAVIC to it. We believe that might really stall the timing in order to actually get something out there for the mariner. But keep in mind, as guidance goes, we review it on a regular basis, and we'll continue to do it. So, but to address Jerry's specific question, there was involvement from the offshore developing industry, and certainly we'll continue the open dialogue to make sure that we touch upon what's beneficial for both sides, all sides.
Okay. Deerin, I'm going to go back to you with a me question. You mentioned that in preparing for the national strategy, you're planning on doing outreach to groups such as MACO and NROC and others, regional bodies. How should we expect to hear from you, and what should we be ready with, and what questions should we be thinking about in advance to help us provide a good and productive answer when the time comes?
Yeah, right. Thank you. That's a great question. For Marco's purposes, I would say keep doing what you're doing. I'm not privy to the work of the body, but as Nick said, there's additional funding coming Marco's way, and I assume that there are plans being developed for how to use that and to plug those in constructively to address challenges, associated with Marco work plans, data information, engagement, those kind of pieces. Keep working on that, and when we roll in, be prepared as an organization to offer, as I suggested in the slide, here are the things that are most important to us going forward, and here's what we need in order to accomplish that. It's an opportunity to me both to be parochial and specific, but also thinking strategically to sort of leverage the big picture things that are in motion that you want to see stay in motion, and that are complementary to or similar to the kinds of things that other regions or other regional entities outside of the Mid-Atlantic are working on, right? It's an opportunity to shape the future, both in terms of, blocking and tackling from Marco's purposes specifically, but also bigger picture across the nation. In terms of what the mechanics of that consultation will look like, I want to stop for a second and thank Sean and return the compliment. And if I didn't say that we wouldn't be reaching out to organizations like the Chamber of Shipping specifically, after his, laying out, hey, stakeholder engagement broadly is one thing, but stakeholder engagement effectively is another. We don't get the benefit of organizations like Chamber of Shipping and Sean taking the time to join the group today and to continue participating and providing such important information, because it's not valuable, right? This is what we need to foster and to continue, because it's critical to Marco, to NROC, to other regions to be able to work on. Just sitting back for a second and reflecting briefly on having John, Nick, and Sean as the panel is brilliant, right? It's a case study and why this matters, why this is important, and what, as Sean said, we need to do more of and do better in terms of funneling that relationship. Sean is the source of information, reflecting the specific stuff out of industry, going to John in terms of the federal regulator who's responsible for addressing those, funneling data and information to Nick and the team to make that information accessible, available, relevant, useful for decision makers, to be able to provide the forum in which that gets compared against other data and information that's equally important, right? The point here is not that wind wins over here and shipping wins over here. How do we win together, right? How do we maximize the value of all of this together? It only happens if we have this kind of thing going on. Looping back, right, to sort of answer the question and put a bow around that, that's the kind of engagement that we will be focusing on going forward, thinking about the national strategy. Big picture, working with the region directly, asking for Marco's help to do outreach, but then focusing also specifically on opportunities for entities across the board, whether they're NGOs, whether it's Chamber of Shipping and similar stakeholder, private sector orgs. All of those pieces will contribute to the national conversation and defining the national strategy. So thank you.
Thanks, Deerin. John, you had a slide about expanding ship size, and is there or maybe this is a good question for Sean or John, but is there an upper limit on this? Is this a process that just keeps happening forever? And it seems like I would have, years ago I would have said, well, the width of the Panama Canal might be a constraining factor, and we saw that it wasn't. But is it now?
I'm going to punt to Sean on the size of ships question.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few aspects to this. Can the ships get bigger? Sure. Does that mean they're necessarily wider? No, they might draw more water. They might be deeper, but we are restricted by the ports that we're calling. And also, it's a way to be more environmentally efficient. And more ships is more pollution, and we don't, by having bigger ships and carrying more cargo on certain ships, it reduces that pollution. It also, if you take into consideration, or I guess we all have to take into consideration the economy, and as long as there's product that's being demanded in certain areas of the world, we're going to try to get it there the most efficient way possible. So on some of these, if we're thinking about container shipping, which is kind of probably the easiest thing in our mind to wrap around when we talk about the bigger ships, on a liner service from let's say Northern Europe to the East Coast and to the Mid-Atlantic, maybe rather than having 7 ships for weekly service or daily service, then we could have 4 ships, and accomplish the same thing. So that's really why we're seeing bigger ships. It's not just that there's that much more demand. There is more demand, but it's also to try and become better stewards of the environment and more efficient as an industry. Could they get bigger? They get a little bigger at some point. It's certainly going to reach a status that we have to make sure we get into the ports. The other option is there's one port that can take these ships, and then what we call we have feeder ships, or smaller container ships that or tankers that are running up and down the coast and taking them into the other ports.
Interesting. All right, I think we have time for another question or two. Let's see. John, has Coast Guard done any impact analysis on its training operations that offshore wind will have? So the training operations cited in the question were GUNEX, flight ops, etc.
I'm not aware of any impact study on training operations specifically. I will say that certainly there are some designated training areas along the coast that the Navy and the Coast Guard uses on a regular basis that are outside and away from development for both fairways and TSSs as well as offshore wind. I will say some of our offshore, our deep water assets, they can get far enough offshore to where they can any of their GUNEXs or operations there, they can get away from anything that's close to shore. They do that on a regular basis now. But in the development and leasing process, our capability shops are actively engaged, even though it works through primarily at headquarters, my division, and the marine planning and waterways management at the district level. The capabilities for aviators, for law enforcement vessels or search and rescue assets, all of those, sector level, district level, headquarters level, they are all providing input during this development process to make sure that we can still continue to perform our statutory missions on the regular basis. So. But I'm not aware of any, to answer the question specifically, I am not aware of any specific impact analysis on training, but I will take that back to our Force Readiness Command and see what we can do.
Thanks. We are down to 4 minutes, and I wanted to be able to give each of our panelists a last chance for anything they wanted to say in closing, or something that they didn't get to in their presentations. I'll start with you, Deerin.
Right, thank you, and John, Sean, Nick, thank you guys so much. It's a pleasure and honor to be on the panel with you guys. Thanks to everyone who's on the forum, on the call. We're looking forward to a lot of really good stuff happening in the immediate future. Folks are aware of administration priorities. Those are pushing hard on things which are interesting, challenging, exciting, productive, and good stuff across the board. And I guess I'd just emphasize the message of maximizing the benefits of ocean co-use, right? Which includes the full range use thought about most expansively, including conservation, including biodiversity, including sustainable economic development, including renewable energy, including you know, all the things that are critical to Americans' quality of life and the American economy and American jobs, right? All of that together. When we talk about a sustainable ocean economy, that's what we're thinking about. And being part of the work of Marco, which has from the beginning been dedicated to a similar proposition, is both inspiring and important. And it's great to be able to be part of the group tangentially, but certainly to be working really hard from this end to support everything that all of you are doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Deerin. John.
I just want to say that I certainly appreciate the time and opportunity to share the screen with the panel members, as well as Deerin here, an absolute veteran at the White House through 3 administrations, and it's been a privilege to actually share the screen with you, sir. So I appreciate the time. The only thing I would like to reiterate, and I think there's been some mentions of this in the chat, it's all about the partnerships. It's all about the discussion. None of this can be done in a vacuum. We're all out there. Every industry is looking to use the waterways, not just for the advantage of that industry, but we all want to keep it safe, and we all want to make sure it's efficient, and we all want to make sure that other members can use the waterway, other waterway users have the capability, as well as we still keep it environmentally friendly. We always have to keep sure that we remain, the resiliency of our MTS, of our waters, is critical for all of this movement forward as well. So thank you for this opportunity to present. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to continuing to working with everyone here in the future.
Thanks, John. And I appreciate you mentioning the chat, because the discussion in the chat has actually been really interesting, and everyone who hasn't already done so should take a look. Sean, any closing thoughts?
Again, I reiterate my appreciation for being on this panel, and I think I want to leave you with this is it's easy, especially on these darn Zoom calls like this, where we just see a bunch of names pop up on the screen. When I encourage this conversation to continue, and some of these conversations and what we're talking about is difficult, and it's okay, and it's good to have difficult conversations. So let's do that. Let's continue to do that. If we were in person, we might be all crowded around a coffee machine somewhere, or heading out to lunch or something like that to further discuss this. So in this environment, please, my email, or, reach out to me. I'd love to continue this, or if somebody wants to organize a continued discussion on any of this, we're here to participate in easy and difficult conversations.
Thanks, Sean. Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Wright. I'm not sure how to follow a representative of the White House and 2 actual maritime experts here on this panel. So I think I'll just say thank you to them. This has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate the opportunity here. And thanks for all the input in the chat. And look, we need all of your input to do this work. You all are the experts in your various trades, and so that's how we are able to put out this information. So please reach out. Thanks.
Great. Well, we are at time, and so I'll hand it over to Mike Snyder, the MACO Chair and Ocean and Great Lakes Program Manager from New York State Department of State, who will moderate the second panel. Thank you to my panelists, and I'm looking forward to hearing about offshore wind.